What's up, guys? It's Snugs, and today we're going to talk about the endgame changes I think need to come to Path of Exile 2. A quick disclaimer, I am sick, so sorry about the hoarse voice, but what's kind of cool is I can make sounds like this. Another disclaimer, and sorry, I guess disclaimers are kind of my cup of tea right now, but these are my opinions. They don't have to be your opinions. They're kind of what I would like to see, changed in the game. What I think I would enjoy. That may not be the same case for you, but again, these are just my opinions, guys. Now, let me start by saying I think GGG is doing an amazing job, and they've created an amazing product in what we have in early access Path of Exile 2. But one thing I think that GGG has to be careful with in the current state of the game is that if they nerf everything that's working into oblivion right now in Endgame, they're going to end up kind of frustrating a large portion of the player base. There is one build that is standing out almost past everything else, and that's going to be Spark Stormweaver. So about 50% of the population is currently playing that build, and if you nerf it into the ground, it takes so long to reroll a character right now. What is 50% of the population going to end up doing? It's just something kind of to think about. Aside from all the dupes and corruption modification problems and all those crazy things happening, I think that we have a really great base game that's going on. It's going to take a little time for any developer to really hone in on a game and polish those edges. That being said, let's jump into the changes in the endgame that I think need to come to Path of Exile 2. So for those who aren't familiar with the item Temporalis, it's kind of a controversial topic right now. It is essentially an item. That last line on the item is pretty important. It says skills have a minus X seconds to cooldown. Well, this in combination with Blink allows us to essentially infinitely teleport around the map. Now, while I am a Temporalis enjoyer, and I think this is really cool, I essentially purchased or traded for mine when it was about 180 to 200 divines. It is now 20 divines on the market because of a duplication process that people were taking advantage of. The biggest thing with things like items like this is it feels great if you have it, and it doesn't feel great if you don't have it. Now, it's an incredibly hard to acquire item. It was incredibly expensive. It is not the case because of the duping issue, but that's a whole different topic. That's, something that GGG has already taken care of, but the market is already saturated. It's already happened. But GGG is going to have to decide whether they're going to want to let us blast or whether they're going to take away our toys. I am curious to see what they think about this in the long run. One thing I will mention is this game is heavily influenced by D2. And by D2, there's a chess piece, coincidence that this is a chess piece as well, called Enigma. And Enigma allows you to essentially teleport on any class. Well, also, the skill cooldown is very similar to what the skill cooldown on Blink is as well. I don't know if that's by design. I assume that it probably is. However, sorry for the voice cracks. Fuck. Part of me thinks that this is probably by design, to be completely honest. I don't think they intended everybody or lots of people to be able to be blasting around maps. However, it seems like it is by design. The coincidence between D2 being a chess piece, the cooldown being almost the same as Blink, as long as you have a decently rolled one above 3.3%, at least where I'm at. But it just seems like it is in the game by design. So I personally don't think it's going anywhere. I think it's a cool item, but some people may disagree on this point. The next point I kind of wanted to bring up is towers. I think universally people don't particularly care for towers. The layout of the towers feels static, and it feels like it's the same thing over and over again. It's horrible for melee to get through these little halls. It doesn't feel good. People are just sticking a low tier crap map in them just to get it over with so we can stick our precursor tablet in there. There is a simple solution to this. If they want to keep towers, just have it. Once we finish a connected map that is connected to the tower, we just automatically finish the tower. I think that's the easiest solution if they want to keep towers in the game. This next endgame change is my number one thing, arguably. I don't think this is in the game by design for the long run, but it is incredibly tedious and feels really bad, especially pre-Temporalis, and that is backtracking for rares. I don't know if this was an intention. I don't know if they realized how bad backtracking for rares, but if your movement speed is really low and the fog of war is kind of a really small space, you're gonna constantly miss rares and maps unless you are incredibly thorough, and it just feels tedious. It needs to be changed. The next point is kind of similar to the rares, and that's allowing us to run more of the maps that we want to run. Right now, we are stuck in what feels like augury after augury into Vol Foundry after augury, and if you're doing things like running a breach strategy, which requires an open map, it just feels bad to be running these tiny little hallways and not being able to play the game like you want to be playing the game. I think not necessarily every map we need to be playing the map that we want to run, but I think there needs to be a system that feels a little bit better to play, and we're in biomes that we want to be in a little bit more, without having to sacrifice towers or sacrifice, other ways of playing the game. This next part is kind of maybe a really, really delicate balance, and that has to do with crafting items, how items are in the game, how they feel to find something good, and how rare it is to find something good. There's kind of a catch-22 where if something is too common, it doesn't feel good to find that thing anymore, but it also burns you out if you can't feel like you're finding meaningful items that impact your character. Currently, crafting in the game is essentially you buy a base that's good, or you find a base that's good, you hit it with essence and pray to God, and just hit it with some exalts. The other side to this coin is purple omens, which very few people can afford. That is really the only way besides greater essences to deterministically craft, and almost nobody can afford it. So what's happening is all that currency is getting funneled into mirror tier makers. Everybody else is just stuck with either the trade site or just kind of dealing with crap that you pick up off the ground and hoping you get lucky. That doesn't feel great in my opinion. I think that there should be a little bit more deterministic control over your items, but obviously I want to keep it to a point where items on the ground are still interesting, but maybe just a little bit more control. Changing runes/sockets. Let us do it. That's it. To me, what ends up happening, not being able to replace runes or, things in sockets, is that you can have a great item, a great piece of gear, and because it's got the wrong rune in it, the value on that to yourself even feels so much lower and so much worse. I think this is something that needs to be changed pretty much immediately. That's just my opinion, though. I think that base movement speed needs to be increased just a little bit, maybe 5 to 10%. It's going to make the burnout feel a little bit better, especially when you have to level a new character. Just my opinion again, but I think that's something that GGG should maybe take a look at, giving us a tiny bit more movement speed. Delirium feels bad. The number one thing that I'm really not enjoying about Delirium, and why I actually choose to almost never use it, is because when you spawn those little guys that come out of the portal or icicle looking thing, they're invulnerable for a second and they shove you. It just feels horrible, and it doesn't feel like a good game mode to play. If you don't have points invested in Delirium Atlas points as well, it just doesn't feel worth it. This next point kind of comes back to the movement speed thing, where white mobs are significantly faster than you. It almost feels like we're playing POE1 monsters with a POE2 build, and it just kind of feels disconnected, dislodged. I think that's something that GGG should probably take kind of a look at. They did effectively enhance the dodge roll, but to me, it still doesn't feel great. You can be mid-roll and still get one shot by bosses. Just something to take a look at. My next point is that barrier to endgame mechanics feels a little bit too high, especially when it comes to logbooks and expedition and Audience of the King and ritual, especially those two. Simulacrum's pretty crazy too. You might drop a splinter or two. It takes an enormous amount of time to actually get your first simulacrum. I just think that maybe it's one of those things that it doesn't feel well balanced, and it also feels like the barrier to entry is maybe too high for the vast majority of the player base. This is going to be a controversial topic, but I think that single portal boss fights have got to go. The issue with having a single portal in something that took you a long time or a lot of currency to acquire it, if you traded for it, things like an Audience of the King, you screw up that fight, it feels horrible. And on top of that, you only have one portal, so you don't really have time to actually learn that fight. So what a lot of people are ending up doing is they're going on YouTube, watching a guide on how to beat that boss, and then hoping and praying to God that they can actually beat that boss. But it takes away that first level, that first experience with the boss, because people are just essentially educating themselves on how to beat it in the first place via an online means. And I don't think that's a good system. I think that should be changed very quickly here. Another thing is maps are very similar. The one portal kind of feels bad in maps. I think a great way of addressing this would be in tier 1 through 5, maybe having 4 or 5 portals, something like that. In tier 1 and tier 5 through 10, you would have maybe 3 portals, and then tier 10 through 15, maybe you have 1 portal. I think that's a great balance to maybe where it still feels like there's a lot on the line, but it's a little bit more forgiving. The next one is ground effects and on-death explosions. Ugh. I hate them so much. They make the game so much less enjoyable to play. Here's an example for you. The other day, I have Grim Feast, and I had 18,000 Energy Shield. We all know Energy Shield is probably the strongest defense. It is the strongest defense in the game right now. I had 18,000 ES built up. I was in Augury, which is a very tight corridor map that has a ton of things going on. I'm playing Spark, so there's particle effects flying all over the screen. Well, I killed a monster, a bunch of elemental on-ground explosions happened. I couldn't even see them, and they one-shot me with 18,000 ES. If we're going to keep every other monster pack having on-death explosions or on-ground effects that you can barely see, it has to be telegraphed well. It has to feel fair, because in the current state, it does not at all, and it feels bad. That's something that GGG needs to address immediately. Now, a little bit of background about POE1. There was an orb called a Scouring Orb, which is essentially you could wipe a rare or a magic item back to 0, and it just becomes a white item again. That does not exist in the current state of POE2. So what we end up doing is we are ending up picking up 1 million bases and hitting it with orbs and hoping we get lucky. If it doesn't work out, we essentially sell or scrap the item that we just tried to craft. Shout out to Dark Microtransaction. He's the one who actually brought this up. But I completely agree with his opinion. And I think that if we're not going to have alteration orbs and we're not going to have scouring orbs, I think there's got to be some way of a better system of making things that we're not just chucking on the ground after they don't work out. I think there's got to be a better way. And no, honestly, once you get into late game, salvaging those items for, regals and stuff like that, it doesn't make a big enough impact for me. I'm at the point where it's easier to acquire hundreds of these items. I don't even pick up augmentations and transmutations anymore, because you can literally trade for 300 of them for an Exalt. It just doesn't make any sense to me. And my last and final point, this one may be a little bit controversial. I think when GGG is taking balancing of classes in mind, they need to work on improving the ones that are not performing and that are not being played before you gut what is working into the ground or even performing into the ground. Even if you come and you do a small nerf and you don't focus on those classes that people aren't playing or people aren't enjoying, I think that's a backwards way of approaching it. I really would like to see some of the weaker classes soon being helped and performed before we start gutting the good ones. Well, anyway, guys, that's just my opinion on currently the endgame topics that I would like to see changed or modified or some thought-provoking things. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Just a reminder, if you enjoyed this video and you want to see more content, give me a like and a subscribe. But I hope you guys have a fantastic day, and thank you so much for watching. If you made it to this point, salud, guys. Peace out.